Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming at you live from Film Fanatic headquarters. It is Wednesday at about 9:30. So hope everyone's doing good. There's been a lot of movie watching happening. Surprise, surprise. The Yeah, it's been great. Santa treated me exceptionally well this year. I guess I was more on the nicer side this year as opposed to being on the naughtier side. So I didn't get any coal. I got some great movie posters that I'm gonna be displaying, putting up, and hopefully I can get them in the show. They have them a little bit, have them as a featured guest. So, and I also got some sweet gift certificates to Bull Moose, my favorite place. So I went there the other day and got a bunch of new movies. And it was funny because on Thursday, the day before Christmas Eve, I went there. I always go to the Bull Moose in Waterville, so I went there on Thursday. I had ordered some stuff for presents, for gifts. So I went there to pick that stuff up. But that's a store I can't, if I'm in the area or if I go to, it's impossible for me not to buy anything. So I did buy a couple of movies when I went, and I as well as the gifts that I had ordered online. So, and I did a couple of shows. I did shows. I did two shows, and they were both of those shows featured two of those new releases. I had Judgment Judgment Day, and then also Werewolf Woman. Those two movies I was totally blown away by, and those were both movies that I had never seen before. Had never heard of them before. Totally obscure, especially Judgment Night. So that was a great discovery, and I did two shows for both of those films, and I really appreciate people checking out the channel. And it's always funny because I notice on this channel a lot of the shows that I do, the films that seem to get the most traction and attention are the most like obscure movies that I find in my in when I go to buy films. I usually try to seek out a lot of obscure films, and I try to seek out things that are obviously like kind of related to the genre that I love, and also the directors that I love. But I don't know, I don't usually, when I go to Bull Moose and I do some shopping, I don't usually go there with, say, a list. Sometimes I have an informal list of some things that I'm looking for. Usually that's centered, I usually make lists when it comes to music stuff. I'll have like a little list. But generally, what I love about going to a physical store is, just going through the bins and spending a couple hours and finding stuff and discovering things that I've seen and I haven't seen. Things, and the most enjoyable part is the anticipation of finding something totally new and exciting and that I've never seen before. And I've been doing that more. And I throw a lot of caution to the wind. I used to always be back when I became kind of a collector of movies, and I was only buying DVDs. I used to go with pretty preconceived idea of what I wanted to get. I used to have a list, and I would buy specific movies. I never usually. It was funny. I'm totally opposite now, but I used to only buy movies back when I bought just DVDs. I would only buy movies that I had seen before or that I knew about or heard about. Very, very rarely would I buy a movie that I had never seen before. Even, it was funny, I was even cautious about, say, maybe a new release or something that I had heard a lot about that it was really, really good. I would be really cautious of even buying that. and I usually wouldn't do that. I would always buy things I've seen before, or a movie that I grew up loving, and they had this new DVD, package, a new DVD release of that particular film. But now I'm like totally the opposite. I try to seek out films I haven't seen, and it's really due to the level of high quality stuff that they have there at Bull Moose. But then it's also, I like the prices are fantastic. So, and I've have a pretty good track record. It's only maybe once out of all the movies I've been buying that I haven't seen, there's only been probably one that I saw that I wasn't really that excited about. But generally, I feel like I strike gold. So, and I just love checking out new and old things all the time, or new things that are old for me. I love that experience. I'm kind of, I guess you could say, I'm kind of addicted to that. So as a collector, and especially now that I moved into just as far as new purchases, where I'm going to drop a little bit of extra cash, on in this, on a bunch of films, I only buy Blu-ray. So that's fantastic. But I've noticed I've really lucked out, and so that's the biggest alert. So on Monday, I went to Bull Moose again, and so I struck gold. I got some movies that were just fantastic. So stay tuned for there's going to be probably 3 or 4 more shows based on my new purchases. I have seen just about each one. I've made it all the way through, but blown away. This one in particular is just I was just blown away by this movie. This came out in 1971, and it's a Belgian horror exploitation movie. There's a lot of French actresses and actors in it, and I believe the one of the writers of this film is French, but it's a Belgian foreign film essentially. Never seen this, never heard of it. I looked at the label, and of course, the packaging is awesome. It's a Blue Underground release, and I've talked a lot about Blue Underground. It's their famous logo right there. Blue Underground is one of my favorite exploitation labels. They specialize in all things horror exploitation, but generally anything related to the great period of movies that came out in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I have a lot of Lucio Fulci movies that I've been buying over the last year or so. And I noticed that Blue Underground really does an amazing job with their treatment of all of Lucio Fulci's movies. And I've bought quite a few other titles under their label, but I have a lot of all of the Lucio Fulci movies. I believe are all Blue Underground, and Blue Underground is just amazing. It's such an amazing company. They have such great treatments for their movies. They always have great special features. They take, well, like most of these companies, but they really take a lot of time and love and put a lot of love and care in the transfers from the original film to making it into a digital Blu-ray presentation. So the quality is amazing. Like they actually take the footage is from, or the film itself is actually taken from the original negative. So you're seeing it's wild because you're actually seeing the film, but in a digital format. But you're actually watching the film. So the quality is just amazing. And Severin, which is another company I really love a lot, and I've bought some movies from them recently. I have quite a few of their titles. They also do that too, where they just put so much work into the transfer. But that being said, there's also Synapse and Vinegar Syndrome that also do that. And but probably my two favorite labels are, like, and I have mentioned it before, are Blue Underground and Mondo Macabro, which is another label that really, I think, as a label, they take a real excessively deep dive into the world of exploitation. They really specialize in a lot of weird and totally underground films. I've just been blown away by some of the titles that they have. One of the most bizarre and interesting movies I got from them, which I did a show on a few months ago, was this movie called Succubus. Totally bizarre and just amazing. Totally obscure movie. So they seem to really specialize in even the more kind of obscure, content in this kind of murky world of exploitation. But I have to say, this movie here, Daughters of Darkness, which came out in 1971, I was completely blown away by this movie, and it's labeled as a horror slash erotic thriller film. It came out in 1971. It was directed by Harry Kumel, with the screenplay by Harry Kumel, Pierre Durant, Malfred R. Collar, Jean Ferry, Joseph Emile, J.J. Emile. It's amazing how many people were involved with writing this script. It's crazy. The cast has Delphine Seyrig, Daniel Aulette, Andrea Rau, John Carlin, Fons Radowick, and Paul Esser, and also George Jamin. The lead of this film, Delphine Seyrig, who plays Countess Elizabeth, or you eventually discover her name is actually Countess Bathory, is just stunning on screen. She is harkens well, her whole thing. Watching the special features on this amazing movie, she was a real. I think she basically modeled her whole kind of career off of like the classic actresses from the 30s and 40s, like Marlene Dietrich. They just have this stunning star power when they're on the screen. Just gorgeous and beautiful and just so present. Her Delphine's presence on this film, or in this film, is just miraculous. And also Danielle Ouellette and Andrea Rua. The cast is amazing. The writing is really great. And the biggest surprise of this film is that it's essentially a vampire movie. But it doesn't have any of the typical, quote unquote tropes or characteristics that usually fit into, or that you see, traditionally in a vampire movie. Like it doesn't really have any of that. And so it has, throughout the film, there are shadings of that this could be what the movie's about, but you're not really sure. At one point during the film, I did not think it was going to be a vampire movie. And then, of course, things switched dramatically, and then it was pretty obvious. But this movie has so many different layers to it. It's a really great character study. It's basically centered on these two women. One of them played by Delphine, is where they're basically these two women that meet this couple at this really beautiful hotel that are on vacation, or they're actually on their honeymoon. They had just married. They basically eloped, and they ran away from their family. They don't really want to have contact with their family and friends. They just kind of eloped. It all happened very quick, and then they went to this beautiful hotel to kind of have a getaway. And they meet these two women there that are very set on trying to basically seduce them and pull them into their kind of like, their sexual escapades. And there's like all of this great suspense in this film. The writing is fantastic. The acting is just terrific. It's so beautifully shot. it has very much what I thought like of a giallo kind of vibe to it. It's very, it's got this very mysterious kind of vibe. There's a lot of avenues that the film explores and goes into. I feel in a lot of ways it goes into uncharted territory. There's a mystery. There's like a series. There's also a character who is this police officer who is, which is in the, at least in the beginning of the story, there's a backdrop while these characters are kind of meeting in this hotel. The backdrop of the story or what's happening, in, kind of on the sidelines of the story, is that there's a series of these murders that happen, and the murders are increasing, and there's all this investigation, and eventually the one of the detectives who's involved, with all of these cases, suspects these two women as somehow being involved. So he basically trails them and follows them, and but they do such a great job with not letting the cat out of the bag. You're taken on this ride. There's a lot of suspense. There's not like it's not like I said. It doesn't have. It's definitely a vampire movie, and especially you come to this realization and certain things that happen, especially towards the end or the third act, where it's like, oh wow, I didn't see that coming, and suddenly you're like, okay, this is what's going on. But there's so much great, there's so much great suspense. There's so much. This movie has such beautiful atmosphere. The hotel where the film was shot is just gorgeous. There's there's also this hotel is also situated on this beach, so there's like scenes of nature and the ocean. Um, just amazing, and it goes into a pretty cool character study of the married couple, of where they basically, you get this sense. You get what I love too about this story is there. Like I said, it has a giallo feel, but there's like mystery to it, which is I feel like is a big characteristic of giallo films, like a murder mystery with elements of horror, but it's not overt in either way. It just has these different shades. But overall, at the core of it, it's like a thriller, and there's like an investigative. There's always a police kind of involved in the story. There's some kind of investigative aspect, which this film has very much has that thing, like that thread to it through the film. But it just has it's a cool character studies, particularly around the married couple, where you get a sense of they, uh, you're getting just enough information, and you get the sense that they kind of jumped into this whole marriage thing and this whole like new life together without really knowing each other. It seems like it was not nothing was planned. They just kind of they were in love or attracted to each other, and they just kind of went into this thing without thinking of any kind of ramifications. And you see over the course of the movie that, oh wow, they in a lot of ways they're at odds with each other, and they're really not like to a degree compatible in a lot of ways, but yet they're attracted to each other and they have a commonality. But it's an interesting character study on those two main characters, because that's kind of the central the centerpiece of the whole story of and then there's like, because of that, there's a lot of sexual tension in the movie. And this movie is so great with having, like I said, it doesn't have the typical vampire things that you see in a movie. There's not people running around with capes per se. There's not people with giant fangs. There's not copious amounts of blood. There's not a castle. There's not people sleeping in coffins, and you know it doesn't have that. Even though as reveal happens, it's very much a vampire movie, and it does have a little bit of that, but it does it in a very unique way. But even so, it doesn't have any of those traditional things that you see in a vampire movie at all, especially the first half of the movie. But it has all of these subtle little nuances that happen that give you this feeling of you're not really sure what's going to happen next. You think, well, maybe these two women that are trying to seduce this couple, perhaps they are not involved at all with any of these crimes. Maybe they're just, very open about their sexual lifestyle, and they have, to a degree, a very aggressive way or demeanor that they go about trying to find other people or like-minded people that are into their kind of open love, free sex mentality. And then you also get shades of, well, maybe that's what they do, but they're not maybe capable of, like, they're not really tied to these crimes that are going on. Like, they're not, they don't seem like they would be, uh, you know, like, they don't fit the profile of being especially the lead Delphine. She doesn't necessarily fit the lead characteristic or like lead character of like what you would attribute their attribute her to be, like this murderer or like a serial killer. But then there's other things that happen in the film where you think, well, maybe these women are responsible for these killings, and they're alluring this couple to become their next victims. And then, but then you get the sense that, well, this isn't a vampire movie because it doesn't have any of those traditional things. But it obviously it has very much like a sleazy sexual element to the film. Um, and you kind of think, well, maybe that's what it is. It's that steeped in, say, the supernatural. But then these other things happen, and you get these other shades, little bits of information where you're like, oh, I'm not really sure. Maybe they are vampires. But the whole time, I was watching, I kept feeling just like kind of on the edge and not knowing and not really knowing what's going on, and it built this tension, and I thought that was so cool. And it's also, the other thing that's cool about this film, I tend to like films that are, if they're good, obviously, and they give you just enough story and enough content to keep you interested and you actually care about the characters, because certain films that have this like slow build up, and then before you know it, the film has you, and you're just, you're not leaving your seat. This film has that way of unraveling the story for me. It's very slow. It has a very slow pace, and it was definitely intentional. Like, there's a really great documentary with the producer and one of the writers and the director, where they go back to the original location of where the film was shot, and they talk about how this film was a huge hit too when it came out, and it's hard to believe this came out in '71. Like, it's crazy, it's wild. I love the fashion element, the cinematography. It's got this real larger than life. The colors are beautiful. It's very pulpy. Every person on the screen has a certain high level of extreme, like, sex appeal. It's just great. It's just so great. And they all have this larger than life personality. But it's very slow, and they talk about that in the film, the special features, where the filmmaker was talking about, it was kind of intentional, like, kind of have it centered on these two women, but let the story unravel slowly. Like the Harry Kumel, the director, was talking about that way of unraveling the story was more or less intentional to try to pull you in as a viewer, and it definitely did. I mean, it's an amazing movie. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful, and it's pretty twisted. It's pretty twisted and demented. There's certain things in a movie that are really kind of disturbing. It's definitely sleazy, which is another characteristic of the exploitation giallo things. It's super low budget, but it's one of the cool things too, that on the package of this, they talk about the some of the critics that review this film talked about when this film came out, Daughters of Darkness, in 1971. Like, it actually made a lot of money. It was a very popular movie, but then it seemed like it went to total obscurity. But when it came out, it really appealed to people who were into like the art house European films, and then also people that were into the horror, exploitation world. So it had like two different audiences that are different, that are separate from each other, but yet there's also a commonality between those two kinds of films. As far as the sexual, sensual element, the rawness, and also the sleazy factor, but then the the way the film is shot, the pacing of the film. Those are characteristics of what people deem to be kind of art house films. So it's an interesting combination of both of those worlds, and like they talk about on the cover of this great movie, or in the back of the this package, they talk about how this film really brought those two audiences together. And so very cool, very cool. And I remember seeing it. I have this great documentary on 42nd Street in New York City during the 70s and 80s. When of course 42nd Street, that was where the grindhouse cinema was at its peak. And so all of the great classic exploitation movies were shown in rotation in New York during that time. And there's a really great interview in this documentary where actually Bill Luswig, who's actually the founder of Blue Underground, right here, and he's one of my favorite filmmakers. Most notably for so many great movies, so many great movies. He uh, he is definitely one of my favorite directors. Of course, Bill Luswig, most well known for most well known for Maniac and Maniac Cop and Maniac Cop Two. Maniac is my favorite slasher exploitation movie of all time. And Bill Luswig has made a ton of movies, but he has kind of shifted to his career from being a director to uh, basically he got into distribution. He started this company, Blue Underground, and they, like I said, it's one of my favorite companies. So he, really does pay it forward. I think in a lot of the films that influenced him growing up, and that were big influences on Maniac and all of his films. But he talked. There's an interview in this documentary that I mentioned about 42nd Street where he talks about, there was a time during that whole period in New York during on 42nd Street and during the Grindhouse period where they were showing so many different styles of movies. Like they would be showing movies like, some foreign art house film, and it would be on the same bill as say like George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, and it kind of all fell under the same kind of guise of and then they have like a Herschel Gordon Lewis movie, and then they would show Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween, like kind of all in the same succession. So there was an amazing wide variety. So it was really interesting when they talk about that on this, or when that reviewer describes that this film had that gap, and they also brought that was in the middle of those two kind of universes, the art house and the horror world, but it brought all those people to it, and I think that there's definitely that's for me is an allure of a lot of these exploitation movies because they have this element of where the acting's not really great, they have this really dated quality, but at the same time there's like all of this care put into the film because of the lack of a budget, and but they also visually tell such an amazing story, and there's so they have such a rich texture even though they're trashy and sleazy. Like it's just this great pulpy experience. So I can see how both of those universes, the art house and the horror exploitation, are kind of to a degree joined at the hip, and maybe at one point they were looked at as a separate, two separate kind of genres. But maybe this was like the film that kind of bridged that gap. So, but amazing film. Amazing film. Never, I had never seen this, never heard about it. I literally saw it when I was going through the bins or the aisles at Blue Moose. I was literally just combing through it, and I came across this one. And I'm like, whoa, like this sounds great. And the price for this was fantastic. It looked totally like something up my alley, and it was great. Um, and it was funny. I was watching it with my friend, and we were both on the same wavelength. Like we went back and forth. Or maybe this is just a crime mystery movie, or maybe these girls are serial killers, or maybe they're just not real. They're not part of these killings. And also, maybe this isn't a vampire movie. It's got all of these different elements going on. But I remember at the end, we both, or towards the, when the big reveal happens, we both looked at each other and were like, "Oh, I guess it was a vampire movie," and it was pretty funny. Like we looked at each other, and I think we said it at the same exact time, where it was like, "Oh, okay." But fantastic movie. One of my greatest discoveries. I just love this movie. It's so great. It's such an awesome movie. Daughters of Darkness from Blue Underground came out in 1971. It's a Belgian foreign film. One of the most original vampire movies I've ever seen. Uh, just amazing. So cool. So this is Jason Dean. Thanks again. If you like this channel, please like and subscribe to my page. And we will see you next time. Peace.